Hey guys, and welcome back to my channel. This is the fifth part of What If Naruto Was in High School DxD. Before we begin, don't forget to like and subscribe, and also go and support the author, link in description. Issei hurt all over, but he refused to stop. His clothes were torn to ribbons. His torso had only a few loose strips of red cloth left from his shirt. Numerous purple, splotchy bruises showed all over him. His arms, legs, and back had various shallow cuts, blood dribbling down his body that resembled red pinstripes. Konako and Kiba stood across from him. Konako was stretching her fingers and then turning them into a fist. Her face was passionless as she stared at Issei. Kiba held a sword he'd summoned with sword birth at his side. Kiba's smile seemed proud and slightly regretful at the same time. They were training in a clearing near the Gremory mountain retreat. Kiba and Konako were fighting Issei simultaneously, one of Naruto's tweaks to Issei's training regimen. Kiba's speed and Konako's strength made for a deadly combination against any foe. Issei's sole goal was to survive as long as possible and push them back if he could. They'd been training him for the majority of the day. As a precaution, Asia was practicing her magic lessons close by while Aeno supervised them. The first of these spars had left Issei a bloody mess, so Asia had demanded to be closer going forward so she could heal him when he needed it. Issei wouldn't let her so long as he could stand though. He had to get stronger. He couldn't if he never got hurt. Besides, he thought, what kind of man am I if I can't stand on my own? Issei fought to keep his breathing under control. If he was already winded, he wouldn't be much use in the raiding game. He stood in a fighting stance, readying for the next round with his teachers. Kiba's lips quirked up ever so slightly. Konako mirrored Issei's stance. "Ready, Issei-senpai?" Konako asked. He didn't know if he had the energy left to speak, so he just nodded. Kiba was the first to move. The knight dashed across the clearing faster than most could keep track of. However, now Issei could. The constant barrage had gotten his eyes used to tracking things at such speeds. Issei brandished his boosted gear gauntlet to block Kiba's slash. Kiba altered his sword's path though to get around his defense. Issei reacted just in time to narrowly avoid the blade's tip, but he still wasn't quick enough to dodge it completely. The edge of the blade cut into Issei's side, adding another wound to his collection. He tried to catch Kiba by grabbing his arm, but Kiba leapt away before he could be caught. Konako then sprinted forward, aiming a punch at Issei's midsection. Issei had learned the hard way many times over how strong her blows were, so he did what he could to avoid them. Konako wasn't as fast as Kiba, but she was still quicker than Issei. Issei couldn't get away from her, so he instead stayed close and dodged her strikes. Issei managed to duck around one of her strikes to give him a shot at her head. He took the chance. He put all his strength into his gauntlet hand and punched. The blow connected. It wasn't strong enough to cut her, but Konako immediately disengaged and jumped to the side, a fresh bruise on her right cheek. It was the first time he'd landed a clean blow on either of his teachers. Issei felt like leaping for joy. It was a tangible sign of his growth. It wasn't much, but now he didn't feel like he would be useless in the coming raiding game. A fresh cut to his leg knocked him from his reverie. Kiba had taken advantage of his momentary distraction and turned it into a new wound. Issei ignored the pain and glared at him. He wanted to shout at him, but Issei understood Kiba's intent well enough. Don't get distracted in a fight. And the fresh blood dripping down his leg drove home that lesson with every heartbeat. Issei was getting tired though. He could feel it. His entire body ached in ways he'd not thought possible before this training trip. But he didn't want to stop until he got one solid hit in on Kiba. Landing his first good strike on Konako was something Issei wanted to celebrate, and it gave him a renewed confidence that he could do the same to the knight of the group. The problem though was how to actually do it. Kiba's speed and quickness made it almost impossible for Issei to keep up with him for anything longer than brief spurts. It took all he had just to follow his path. At his current level, Issei knew he wouldn't likely land a hit on Kiba. Wait. He looked at his sacred gear. An idea popped into his head. Even he would admit it was likely a stupid idea, but it was the only one he had at the moment. Besides, it wasn't like he had anything to lose. Naruto had been pushing Issei hard to learn how to meditate. When Issei had asked why, Naruto had explained how he believed his sacred gear was actually conscious in some way. As Issei took it, that meant his mind was linked with his sacred gear, and that meant it should know what he wanted. Kiba had also suggested in a lesson soon after the trip had begun that sacred gears would evolve based on their wielder's desires. Issei decided that now was the time to test that theory. Oi! He didn't know how to do it yet, so he focused on his sacred gear to reach out to it. Think you can help me out here? There weren't any words, but the jewel on his gauntlet glowed right then. Issei got the feeling it was snorting like what he wanted was nothing more than child's play. His gauntlet then shouted, "Boost!" Issei's time training had taught him a lot about his own power and sacred gear. On the first day, Rias had him power up as far as he could to prove a point. She then had him fire a dragon shot at a mountain in the distance. He did, and the mountain never stood a chance. And he was the only one surprised by his ability. The mountain had essentially disappeared. That had boosted Issei's confidence a long ways. Rias had then shocked everyone by announcing she'd sealed a majority of his power away the night she'd made him her pawn. Apparently, his true ability was too great for his body to handle at the time, so she'd placed 8 levels of seals in him to protect him. However, she released the first one that day, saying his training with Naruto to that point had already made him ready for it. The surge of strength had been beyond Issei's wildest dreams. That same night, he vowed to become strong enough so that his next seal would be undone by the end of the training trip. They would need every bit of power they had to win the rating game. Over the next few days, he'd discovered that his sacred gear had transfer, an ability that let him send its built-up energy to another. It increased Konoko's strength, Kiba's speed, and both Asia and Akeno's magic exponentially. Rias had been ecstatic to see that ability, as it would serve them greatly in their match against Reiser. With another cry of boost from his left arm, Issei ran after Kiba. Kiba gave him a small grin before brandishing his sword. He too then moved to engage Issei once more. Kiba's sword and Issei's gauntlet collided, both vibrating from the meeting. They both then started battling in close quarters. Issei punched and kicked as best he could, but Kiba's vastly superior reflexes and quickness let him block or avoid each blow with ease. Issei, on the other hand, couldn't do the same with Kiba's attacks. Though he was able to deflect or dodge a few stabs and slashes, Kiba landed 2 hits for each miss. The two continued their flurry for what felt like an eternity, both attacking and defending whatever they could. Issei's arms were growing heavy soon enough, so his defense got sloppy, allowing Kiba to land as many cuts as he wanted. Issei was beginning to feel faint, but he wouldn't give in yet. His gut was telling him that he was almost there, so he dug deeper and deeper into himself to stay conscious. Eventually, his whole chest seemed painted crimson, there was so much blood. He didn't know if someone tried to call out for him to stop, but he wouldn't even if they had. Issei couldn't stop until he fell over. If he did, he wasn't putting everything he could into his training, and he abhorred the thought of letting down Naruto or Rias by not giving his absolute best to bettering himself. Issei didn't know how many times his sacred gear boosted, but, after one last time, its green jewel shined brighter than ever before. Feeling that was the sign, he activated his gauntlet. It cried, explosion, and all the accumulated power to that point poured into Issei. There was so much built up that the infusion of power left Issei glowing. Without doubt, this was the strongest Issei had ever felt. With it, he had no doubt he could knock Kiba out. Issei didn't know how long his new strength would last, so he immediately went on the attack. The difference in might was noticeable. Now, Kiba was barely able to block Issei's punches, and outright avoiding them was nearly impossible. Issei's blows sent a crack through Kiba's sword with every strike. With one last heave, Issei sent one final punch right for Kiba's face. Kiba tried to block it, but his sword couldn't sustain the force anymore. It shattered, barely impeding Issei's strike. For Issei, it was immensely satisfying to see Kiba's face contort around his fist. For a moment, it was like the world stopped around them. There was only Issei and Kiba. And the punch that finally found its mark. Then the moment ended, and Kiba went flying backwards, much to Issei's shock. Konako sprinted over and caught Kiba in the air, the force pushing her back a few steps. She looked from Kiba in her arms to Issei, standing 50 feet away. She mumbled, amazed, strong. Issei's chest swelled with pride. He'd finally done something worth noticing in his training. He'd landed punches on both his instructors and got Konako to admit he was strong. He was ready to whoop for joy. He mused aloud, pride filling his voice, just wait until Naruto gets back. I can't wait. His eyes rolled back in his head and he suddenly fell over, unconscious. Everything was black. Issei had no idea where he was. The abyss seemed to be creeping closer around him. Everywhere he looked, there was nothing. The darkness sent a chill up his spine. He spun around and confirmed that it was truly everywhere. Where? He wondered. He was close to panicking, but something in his mind told him he actually knew where he was. So we meet at last. Issei whirled around. The voice seemed to surround him. It was deep and powerful, reminding him of an ancient, legendary power. He was certain he'd never heard it before, but it somehow felt familiar. The abyss didn't retreat, so he spoke into it. Who are you? Where am I? Suddenly, a fire sparked beneath his feet and began spreading. It continued to expand until only a mixture of orange and red flames existed. However, the flames licking at him had no heat. Regardless of how his mind knew fire was hot, Issei felt like he was standing in a fresh summer breeze within the maelstrom of fire. A blast of wind blew so hard it almost knocked him over. Issei took a steadying step and turned around to find the source. His jaw dropped at what met his sight. A gigantic western dragon stood taller than the towers of fire. Its scales were red, the flames reflecting off in a dazzling yet terrifying show. The dragon stood at least 20 meters tall and 10 meters thick. Issei instinctively gulped. Big, he thought with a nervous sweat. I am the Welsh dragon Ddraig, that same voice told him. The dragon blew a lick of fire from its nostrils. You are in my domain. Ddraig, he repeated. Issei felt like there was some kind of connection with this dragon, so he asked, are you the spirit in my sacred gear? The dragon whipped its tail lazily. Indeed, it answered. Huh. I confess I was surprised you reached me so soon, Ddraig said. Issei felt insulted somehow. What do you mean? The dragon snorted. You are lackluster compared to my past wielders? Huh. Issei tilted his head, unsure by his meaning. Ddraig rolled his red eyes. You also are extraordinarily dim-witted. Oi. But you are still my wielder, Ddraig cut him off. I learned long ago that we should work together. Refusing to do so only spells disaster for the both of us. Albion is insufferable when his partners win, and I refuse to let that annoying lizard win in anything. I have no idea who that is, Issei spoke up, though he felt Ddraig sounded petulant. Ddraig chuckled once. He is my rival and yours as well, since you are me. Eventually, he will make his way to you. It has always been so and will always remain so. However, you have nothing to fear from him at the moment. Issei let out a sigh. That's a relief. He was under no delusions about his own strength. He knew that he wasn't anything special on his own. Naruto had beaten it into his head to never, ever overestimate himself. He didn't know if he would stand a chance against Ddraig's rival as he was now. You don't, Ddraig informed him, as if he knew Issei's thoughts. What? Issei stuttered. The dragon sighed tiredly. Yes, I can see your thoughts if I want to, Ddraig said. We are one and the same, you and I. Therefore, one's thoughts are visible to the other. Issei covered his ears with his hands quickly, like he was keeping his thoughts from leaking out by doing so. So you know about. He trailed off. If I ever desired to, yes. Ddraig's voice echoed in his head, prompting him to drop his hands. But I have no desire to dive into your mind, partner. I have kept only to watching your life through your eyes. I will respect your innermost thoughts so long as you respect mine. Deal. Issei immediately accepted. He stopped, a new thought in his head. So, have you been watching the past few weeks? Ddraig's tail listed to his side. I have very little to do in here, so I content myself by watching your life. It is certainly different than any of my wielders so far. I've never been a reincarnated devil, for one. Issei counted that as a point for him in the greatest Sekiruti ever column. He asked, can you tell me how much stronger I've gotten? Ddraig closed his eyes. He soon answered, in the past week you've trained, your strength has doubled. I would be shocked if your master doesn't release your second seal by the end of the trip. That made Issei jump for joy. He's spent nearly every waking moment training the past week, so to see such results was great to him. Another thought gave him pause. He then asked, curious, speaking of those seals. Can you undo them for me? I feel like I'm going to need all the strength I can get soon. Ddraig's laughter seemed to shake the fire surrounding them. Indeed I can. But I will not. He then explained before Issei could protest, your master is young, but she is no fool. She spoke true. As you are now, your body could not withstand my full power. It would be like a dam bursting. Indeed you would be nigh unbeatable for a short while, but the power would destroy you beyond repair. Not even the nun could heal you then. I see. Issei looked down, dejected. However, Ddraig's words made him look up again. Continue to train yourself and you will gain my strength. It is only a matter of time at your current pace. That made Issei feel slightly better but not much. I just want to help make sure Buku doesn't have to marry that Reiser. He clenched his fists at his side. He doesn't deserve her. Now, Ddraig dragged him from his thoughts. I have a few questions for you, partner. For me? Issei looked at the dragon, confused. I doubt I know anything that he doesn't. Sure. What is it you desire most? Ddraig then continued, my partners over the years have all yearned for something above all else. For many, it was power. Others, knowledge. You, however, I am certain desire neither. So what is it you desire most? Issei thought for a minute. He then asked, don't you already know? I mean, you've been a part of me my whole life, right? True. But I wish you to speak it yourself. Even though I have seen your entire life, I still cannot be certain of your greatest desire. I know who and what you are, but I'm certain of little else about you. Issei sat down to think, disregarding the nearby fires still dancing around him. He contemplated his answer, uncertain of it himself. He had two great desires in his life now. To obtain a harem beyond any stretch of the imagination and to protect everyone he cared about. He didn't know which meant more to him. Had he never met Naruto, he knew which would be the greater. It had always been a dream of his, and, ever since learning he became a devil, he desired a treasure trove of beautiful women dedicated to him. But Naruto had opened his eyes to just how much everyone around him meant to him. And this upcoming raiding game kept his blood boiling. Nothing made him happier than thinking about keeping everyone safe from such troubles. Asia's smile alone made all the hard work to get strong worth it. In the end, he couldn't decide which was greater. So he answered Ddraig, I have two that are the same for me. Oh. Draig's eye arched curiously. It's always been my dream to have a harem. Ddraig laughed once more. Easy enough to obtain for us. That stopped Issei cold. He mechanically looked up at the dragon, shocked. What really? The dragon loosed a few chuckles. Indeed. It is only natural for our desires to desire us. All my wielders have had their pick of the litter, so to speak, if they desired it. Some of the most famous harems in history came from my past wielders. That, Issei shook, is amazing. Tears of happiness fell from his eyes. You're the greatest partner a guy could ever ask for, he declared with every fiber of his being. I am aware, Ddraig preened. He then got the conversation back on track. You said you had two greatest desires. Issei calmed down and nodded firmly. I do. Your second. To protect everyone I care about. Issei's face was stone cold serious. What juxtaposition, Ddraig mumbled to himself. But an interesting choice nonetheless. Far more standard. Why? Because I finally realized what it's like to have. He struggled to phrase it right. I've never had this. He gestured to everything around him. Not the fires, but everyone out there, he pointed above, like he was pointing to the outside world. What do you mean by that? Ddraig sounded genuinely curious. Issei smiled. Everyone out there right now. I don't know why, but I feel they genuinely want to see me succeed at everything I do. My parents, Matsuda and Motohama, are the same, but not to the same level. They've never gone out of their way like everyone else has. Everyone out there is doing their best to help me get better. Ddraig pointed out, you're aware that the only reason for your training trip was to help win the upcoming rating game, correct? I know that. Issei struggled to describe why it mattered so much to him, but he knew he had to try. Ddraig deserved that much. It's been ever since I found out I was a devil now. Anytime I went to Akeno Senpai, Bakuo, Kiba, or Konako-chan, they answered my questions honestly and tried to help me however they could. And Asia has done nothing but help me, regardless of what I do. I've never had so many people willing to go so far for me. He let out a small, morose laugh. Usually, people just laugh at me and call me scum. But everyone else doesn't. So I want to help them in the only way I know how. I want to keep them safe. He then went silent. Ddraig thought on his own for a moment. Interesting. What makes you so certain they truly care for you? Naruto, he replied without hesitation. When he's around. I don't know how, but I'm just sure. Ddraig hissed harshly, bringing Issei up short. You should be wary of that, Naruto. Issei was equal parts stunned and insulted. Naruto had done nothing to make Issei doubt him. Oi, he said, all humor absent. You'd best be careful. Naruto is a big reason why I'm here right now. Without him, I wouldn't even be trying to meet you. Ddraig sniffed. I won't deny that his advice has been very good for you. He seems to have been a good friend to you so far as well. However, the certainty in the dragon's voice made Issei stop. He keeps secrets from you. Huh. Issei thought back to all his conversations with Naruto. He'd asked Naruto some fairly embarrassing questions and not once had he refused to answer. If anything, some of Naruto's answers made Issei regret asking. Not once had Naruto hidden something from him to his knowledge, so he told Ddraig so. Ddraig snorted derisively. That's because you do not know what to ask. Naruto has a significant power within him. Something far beyond the combined might of your little group. I would say it alone could easily destroy your entire home city. Issei stood and thought about this revelation. However, he was more curious about it than suspicious. You mean Naruto has a sacred gear too? Ddraig shook his head. No. What's within him is no simple sacred gear. It is more like this entity is as much a part of his soul as his is of its. It's like two beings are separate yet merged into one. This is something far beyond the soul's link, like with a sacred gear. For instance, my soul will find a new host upon your death. However, it feels like neither Naruto or this being can exist without the other. So what are you saying? Issei asked. And how do you know all this? Draig's jaw snapped in annoyance. I know this because I know how to look for it. You can't feel it as I do. The dragon took a moment to calm down. Look. I understand your affection for your friend. But he is far deadlier than anyone you've encountered to date. Is he stronger than you? Issei asked, genuinely curious. Ddraig sniffed, both amused and affronted. Before I was sealed, he bragged, it took the combined might of your three great powers to merely seal me into this sacred gear. I could wipe out entire dimensions if I wanted. So no. There are only two beings in all of existence beyond me. Naruto is not one of them. And you should hope you never encounter either of them. Then there shouldn't be any reason to worry, Issei finished. Ddraig looked at him oddly. Naruto's our friend, and he's gone out of his way to help us. I have no reason to think he's some secret villain. He's just stronger than he looks. You haven't told me anything I really didn't know. You underestimate him. Issei shook his head. Nope. I just trust him. Who knows why he hasn't told us about his real strength? But I trust him. He'll tell us about it when he's ready. Besides, he said with a grin, it's probably why he gave me such good advice about finding you. Ddraig closed his eyes, frustrated, but he didn't try to convince him further. All I ask is you keep a close eye on him. There is more to Naruto than he has shown you. I don't know all there is, but I strongly recommend being cautious. Look, Ddraig continued, I'm not telling you that your time with him has been a lie. I honestly have no idea what his motivations were for approaching you. It could have been out of entirely innocent intentions. All I'm saying is that there's more to him than you know, and he can easily be dangerous. Just, be careful around him and watch him. Issei grinned. He didn't agree with Draig's observations, but he wouldn't try and convince him further. So he said, but I have you for that. A few small laughs came from Ddraig. I suppose that's true. So, Issei asked, what stories do you have to tell? What kind of harems are we talking about here? With another chuckle, Ddraig and Issei started to connect. Ria set her glasses on the desk and rubbed her eyes. She let out a tired sigh. She leaned back in her chair and looked at the ceiling. Why must the Phoenix have such an annoying regeneration? She was sitting in the Gremory family vacation home's largest office. Stacks of papers, books, and binders cluttered the desk in front of her. A laptop gave off the only light in the room, as the fire had gone out hours ago. She'd pulled the shutters shut to help her concentrate, but Rias yearned for some background noise. With a gesture and a simple incantation, magic circles opened the dozens of windows, letting in nature's music. A few streams of moonlight added a bluish hue to the room. Rias had spent almost the entire training trip strategizing for the upcoming raiding game. She'd left Issei and Asia's training to her peerage. Aeno gave her daily updates about their progress, and Issei and Asia were showing great growth. Issei had even reported that he finally made contact with his sacred gear's spirit, the Welsh dragon Ddraig. Aeno had brought Issei along yesterday to tell her directly. He'd been so proud to announce Ddraig to her. She honestly found it a little cute how excited he was. He'd also said he and Asia had been practicing a special move he'd invented. Aeno had asked him to demonstrate for them, but Issei bashfully admitted it wasn't ready yet. All he'd said is that it was something he'd come up with and only something he could do. Rias had been curious about it, but she hadn't pressed him. Rias, after gauging Issei's growth for herself, was now sure that she could undo the second seal on his power. However, she decided to let him work on his technique for the last few days before the raiding game. She'd unleash his next level the day of the game in order to truly surprise Reiser. Idly, she smirked. Prepare yourself, Reiser. You have no idea what's coming. She still wasn't certain how to counter Reiser's regeneration ability, but she had complete faith in her peerage. Her trump card was completely hidden from her opponent. Naruto had discussed Issei's training regimen with her on the way to the mountains. Initially, the plan had been to train Issei in magic as much as physically. Naruto convinced her though to focus on Issei's physical portion with only a small introduction into magic. Rias agreed with him that it was probably best to focus on what her new servants were best at with only 10 days to train. For Issei, that meant focusing on his martial arts and connection with his sacred gear. For Asia, that was streamlining her magical abilities. The results thus far had spoken for themselves. Naruto had then gone off on his own to train, saying that the others would only get in his way. Rias had let him go but got a general location he'd be in if she needed to find him. She then asked a Gremory family butler to keep an eye on that area to get an idea of his true strength. The reports had her equal parts awed and terrified. Each night, she got an email detailing energy readings in the area Naruto was training. Each one was a downright ridiculous read. The magical readings were still low but demonic energies were at least ultimate class. She had no idea how, as Naruto had not once shown any competency in any demonic art. If she'd not known the observer's ability beforehand, she'd think this was a miscalculation. The reports also mentioned that multiple mountains had crumbled in that area, and each mountain's disappearance coincided with a spike in demonic energy. Rias had asked the servant for a photograph showing the before and after state of the area. The before picture was of a lush, green forest with a small mountain range in the distance. She got the after picture a few hours ago. The entire landscape was destroyed. All the trees were little more than splinters, and the mountain range was now a flat plain. Rias had an idea of how powerful Naruto really was due to him fighting off Kurika. But she'd underestimated him. Not once had she thought he had this kind of strength. She still wasn't even certain this was everything he could do, so she wouldn't be surprised if Naruto was as powerful as Amua. That was a sobering thought, and it led to numerous hours pondering the mystery that was Naruto Uzumaki. The more she thought about him, she found the less she realized she knew about him. She'd started with what she knew for certain. Naruto was close to her age, he was enrolled in the same classes as Issei and had been ever since arriving months before they were both revived. He lived alone in an apartment building that had no other tenants, and he was obscenely powerful. Very little else was sure about him. Rias had scoured the Kyoa Academy records for everything about Naruto. Everything in it was a forgery. She'd looked into his listed next of kin and found nothing, not even birth records. She hadn't had a chance yet to ask Grafia about how she knew Naruto. Knowing all that threw everything about Naruto into even more disarray. However, Grafia's presence confirmed that Surtx was involved. In what way, Rias couldn't be sure. But her brother's presence explained a lot. He had nearly infinite resources, so creating a false life for Naruto was child's play for him. It also explained Naruto's lodging, as the company that owned the complex was a shell. What Rias couldn't figure out was why Surtx was so interested in Naruto. The unique piece he'd given her was made specifically for Naruto, this she was certain. That meant he'd had his eyes on him for quite a while and wanted him brought into the fold as a reincarnated devil. She stood up from the desk and stretched. A thought crossed her mind. Did Oni-sama know all along how strong Naruto would be? It would explain Surtx's interest, but she couldn't figure out how he'd know. By all accounts, Naruto was an ordinary human before she'd used the unique piece on him, a remarkably perceptive one but a normal person all the same. And based on everything she'd seen, his strength came solely from his innate demonic energy and magic was beyond his patience. An evil piece by itself had no demonic energy. It just transformed the energy within the target. She knew she didn't know much about how unique pieces varied from standard pieces, but she doubted it was too different. Even mutated pieces still did the same as their normal counterparts. Such extraordinary levels of demonic power comes from few sources. In all of history, such power only came from very few natural-born devils like Xerxes or Ajoka Beelzebub, or from above-average devils, reincarnated or no, who've spent centuries training themselves. Not just anyone can put out such might, and Naruto defied all conventional knowledge with his output. The only explanation she could come up with was that he'd always had this kind of power, but he had kept it hidden all along. But nobody at Konoha had any clue he was anything more than a normal human. Not one devil, including all of Sana's peerage, had suspected his true abilities. No matter how she tried to rationalize it, that explanation made no sense. At least one out of herself, Aeno, Sana, or Tsubaki alone would have felt it if he'd always had demonic energy within him. It also failed because of the night she'd revived him. If he'd already had such strength available, there was no reason Ddraig should have been able to even lay a finger on him, cheap tricks or no. She also found it hard to believe he'd willingly let Issei, who he cared for so deeply, go out with Rainare or let Rias have him in the first place. Rias rubbed her eyes, both irritated and confused. Naruto made no sense no matter how she thought about him. Nothing she could come up with explained who he really was, and it was maddening for her. She sighed, exhausted. She mumbled, "Why are you so difficult to figure out, Naruto-kun?" "You know," he suddenly spoke up, "you could just ask." Ria suppressed a smile. She'd half expected him to hear her. It was in his nature to respond when someone talked about him. She opened her eyes and looked up to the windowsill, and there he sat. Naruto was leaning against the frame as he sat on the sill. His upper body was bare and his pants were in tatters. His hair was oily and unkempt, a sign that he hadn't bathed since he went off to train on his own. He was looking up into the clear night sky, the moon casting his shadow on her office floor. He looked down and gave her a toothy grin. "Thinking about me, Rias-chan?" "Trying to make sense of you," she answered. With a small spell, she leapt to the window and sat next to him. Naruto let out a few small laughs. "Trust me when I say you should give up now. People have tried all my life, and nobody's managed to yet." Yet being the key word there, Naruto-kun, she pointed out with a small smile of her own. There was something in his boisterous nature that always had everyone in good spirits, and not even she was immune to its charm. "You'll find I'm not quite like anyone else you've ever met before." He suppressed further chuckles. "I suppose you've got a point there. Before waking up with you in my bed, I'd never made friends with a true blue devil before." "I suppose you could say I was your first then," she said with a coy grin. That got a few laughs from him. "I guess you're right about that." "And was I your first?" She replied cheekily, "You were not the first boy I've been in bed with." Naruto feigned a heart attack. "No. The pain," he shouted overdramatically. "I can't believe it." "I'm coming, Elizabeth." Rias giggled at his antics. She said, "You really do need to quit watching so much foreign TV. It's going to rot your brain." "Can't rot what's already rotten." She shook her head, smiling all the while. She then looked up to the sky, closed her eyes, and took in the music of nature. The cicadas sang a song to her, a few nocturnal birds were harmonizing their calls, and a mixture of other sounds came together in a melody she'd not heard in years. She didn't know how much of it was artificial from the barriers around the property or not. She enjoyed it all the same. "You know," Naruto interrupted her reverie. "You really should smile more like that." She looked at him, curious. "Why do you say that?" "Because you're beautiful." A slight dust of red showed on her face. It wasn't what he said that got her. She'd been called beautiful, gorgeous, and every other similar term more times than she could count. At this point, she was practically numb to it when someone complimented her. It was how he said it. It wasn't a compliment from Naruto. It was a simple fact. He said it like it was no different than saying Earth's sky was blue. It was just an undenying fact of life and not something he used to describe her. Naruto gave her a small smirk that told her he knew what he'd done to her, and it infuriated her to no end. But he took pity on her and didn't point it out. Instead, he asked, "So how's everyone been while I've been away?" "Good," she replied, grateful he didn't bring up her blush. "You'd be proud of Issei." He hummed noncommittally. "I'll judge that for myself." "Then what about your trip?" she asked, the desolate landscape photo fresh in her mind. "It went well." He watched his hand as he clenched a fist. "I feel better than I have in quite a while." He smiled at her. "That punk won't know what hit him." She agreed, "I don't doubt it." Rias had every confidence in him. Anyone able to face down Kurika could utterly crush Reiser. The only question left, she thought, is how he'll do it. "I want to see that for myself." Naruto changed the conversation back to her. "So how've you spent the trip?" She turned and gestured to the desk. "Studying," she told him. "Them and you." Naruto jumped down and walked to the desk. He looked over a few documents and mumbled a few things to himself. He then raised his eyes to her and asked, "Figure them out yet?" Rias cast a spell and used a series of magic circles like stairs to walk down to him. She nodded as she reached the ground. "I know everything there is to know about all 15 of Reiser's pieces." He let out an impressed whistle. "Impressive. And I don't doubt it based on what all I'm seeing here." "I'd quiz you, but I don't want to get embarrassed," he quipped. He then asked her, "So what's the diagnosis?" She shrugged. "The only problem will be Reiser himself and his regeneration. As a matter of fact, I'm certain we could defeat everyone else even without your help. In strength, the only close ones are his queen and Aeno, but Issei's new transfer ability easily puts Aeno above her. I'm guessing it's self-explanatory." Naruto asked of Issei's new ability. "It is." Naruto hummed appreciatively. "Sounds like you've put some thought into how you stack up with them." He added, pleased, "Good. You know a bit about strategy. Do we know what the terrain will be like?" She shook her head. "The teams don't find out until they arrive." He clicked his tongue. "Is it always done like that?" "For the most part," she confirmed. Rias grabbed a glass of water she'd left on a table earlier that night. "There are some times when the participants know where they'll be fighting beforehand, but that's only in special cases. Usually, nobody but the game masters know until the teams arrive. There are a few things we can be certain of though," she added. "For one, the raiding game will be within a pocket dimension created specially for our game. Also, our game isn't officially sanctioned, so it won't be very expansive. I doubt the area will be larger than a few square kilometers. And Graphia's involvement ensures it's a layout I'm better suited to than Reiser," she thought with a small smirk. "Wow." Naruto shook his head. "Are raiding games really that big for devils?" "They are arguably the most important event in the underworld, Naruto-kun," she informed, surprising him. She took a sip of water, warm now, and set the glass down. "Raiding games have become the primary way to earn prestige. They're such a spectacle that few official games aren't watched by a majority of the underworld. They're not just a way to settle disputes between high-class devils, Naruto-kun. A raiding game is so much more." Naruto took a moment to take in everything she told him. Rias took that time to tell him more. Raiding game performance is also the fastest way to earn a class promotion. Now she had his rapt attention. Most high-class or above reincarnated devils earn their rank through raiding games. As a matter of fact, I think there's a few reincarnated devils in the top 10 now. Naruto tried to hide his need to know more, much to Ria's amusement. The fact he was a measly low-class devil mattered more to him than he'd admit. Becoming a devil always enhanced a person's greatest desire, and it seemed Naruto's desire was a need to be more than he was. He probably wasn't even aware of it, but she'd seen that look in almost every low or middle-class devil. They all wanted more. It was only their nature as devils. Naruto pulled up a few chairs and sat in one. He gestured for her to sit opposite him and she did. Raiding games, he paused, aren't just games then, I take it? She shook her head. They are as much status symbols as entertainment. Often, competitors will take a dive in order to get political gain. Raizer, as it turns out, has 2 such losses on his record. Naruto asked, what all is a raiding game then? Ria grinned. It was entertaining to see Naruto try to dig more out of her. I'm going to need something to drink. That will take a while to explain. She left the suggestion hanging. Naruto frowned but he agreed. He stood up and left to find something for the two of them to drink together. Rias looked up to the window she'd been perched with him. She went over their conversation to see if anything new about Naruto popped up. She found nothing that suggested how he was so strong. She still didn't even know for sure what his age was. You know, he'd said, you can just ask. Rias then decided to stop trying to get him to reveal anything through indirect means. Not once had she been able to get him to slip on anything important. She'd be direct going forward. She'd not let him wiggle out either. She would start with simple things and gradually build up their mutual trust so that she could get the pieces to the puzzle that was Naruto. Putting them together would come later. Naruto's voice came from the door, I didn't know what you'd like, so I just grabbed a red. She turned and saw he'd brought a bottle of red wine and a pair of drinking glasses. She'd drank socially before, so a single glass was nothing special to her. But she realized this was an opportunity to learn more about him and took it. I'm underage, Naruto-kun, she reminded him. So, he asked with a raised eye. He popped the cork with his hand and poured them both a glass. Do you really expect me to believe a high-class lady like yourself has never had a glass of wine before? Regardless of that, she replied and grabbed the offered glass, aren't you underage? Yeah. He sat down and sipped from his own glass. I just don't really care about it. Ria set her glass on the table. She at last asked him directly, Naruto-kun, how old are you exactly? You have far too much knowledge for me to believe you're truly Issei's age. He eyed her from behind his glass. Rather than answer, he asked, and what brought this on? I've been looking into you. And what have you found? Nothing. Her answer froze him. As far as I can tell, you don't exist. Every current record on you is fake. So I decided to just ask you about it. Naruto chuckled once. He stayed silent for a moment, like he was debating internally. Finally, he told her, 17. Though I'm not sure if my birthday's passed yet back home. I've never been able to figure out if our calendars are perfectly parallel or just similar. I'm pretty sure my birthday's right in my school records though. Rias lifted her glass. Interesting. So he comes from someplace that doesn't use the Gregorian calendar. I admit, you're taking this better than I thought you would. She took a sip. I expected something like this eventually, he admitted. I knew it was only a matter of time. Rias nodded and leaned back in her chair. 17, she repeated. He's my age yet he's this powerful. Naruto finished his glass of wine and set it down. Anything else you'd like to know? Quite a bit, she replied. But I know we don't have too much time. It's already quite late, and I still promised to give you a crash course on raiding games. He waved her off. We can do that later. We still have a few days before the game. Rias downed what was left in her glass. I suppose you're right. She set her glass down. One more, he asked, holding up the wine bottle. One more won't hurt. Naruto filled up both glasses and recorked the bottle. He grabbed his glass and held it out like he would for a toast. Ria smiled and clinked hers against his. They both then gulped down the wine, neither showing any signs of intoxication. Ria dabbed a napkin at her lips. Before we go, may I ask you one other question, Naruto-kun? Sure. He stood up and collected the bottle and glasses. What was your home like? She added, you've alluded in the time I've known you to your life before coming here. What kind of place would create someone like you? Naruto went silent again for a few minutes, seeming to discuss with himself once more. She didn't want to risk him going into a shell because she pushed, so she waited patiently. At last, he sighed. In a few words, it was both a paradise and a living hell. I'll never forget everyone, but I know I'll never see them again. The day I left, I didn't even say goodbye. I guess you could say I broke it and it broke me. He didn't say anything else. I see. Rias didn't know how to react, so she stayed calm and neutral. She then stood. Thank you, Naruto-kun. Good night. With a nod, he left. Naruto leaned against the wall and crossed his arms. Everyone was in the club room together getting ready for the raiding game. Kiba was inspecting one of his swords. Konako was munching on a sugar cookie. Asia was sitting beside Issei and holding his hand. Issei was unusually solemn, which was no surprise since it was the calm before his first organized battle. Aeno was sipping on some tea she'd prepared, and Ria sat behind her desk, folding her hands in front of her face. Naruto looked at the clock on the wall. A few minutes left, he thought. He looked at Issei and saw his leg was shaking. Nerves. He'll be fine though. Butterflies will go once the fighting starts. It was silent in the room, save the ticking of the clock. The night outside was dark and equally silent. The school buildings in the window had a dot or two of light across the floors. Naruto eyed Rias. The room itself was tense. The kind of tense that you felt in a war room before the general walked in. Everyone was waiting for the meeting to start in earnest, but it wouldn't until the game began. Rias had gathered everyone because they'd all be teleported to the game zone together. Everyone had arrived a few moments ago. Rias had been the last one to arrive, and the room had gone deathly quiet once she'd walked in. The clock struck midnight. The room went dark. Naruto looked up and saw the giant azure magical circle appear. Now that he looked at it, he could see the Lucifuge family crest in the middle of it. He allowed a small prideful smile. He'd spent the past few days studying devil culture, and the major families still alive had been the first thing he'd looked into. Aeno could be surprisingly helpful when she wasn't trying to torment you. The magic circle descended on them all. Naruto closed his eyes. Teleportation, in his experience, came along with slight vertigo. Closing his eyes while teleporting prevented it. He felt the magic envelop him with a slight shiver. It felt like he'd been doused with a bucket of ice water, it was so cold. Even Kurama shivered in his mindscape. He opened his eyes. And saw he hadn't gone anywhere. Huh. Issei blinked dumbly. He looked around. Why didn't we go anywhere? Naruto kept his same thoughts to himself. He'd felt the magic activate, so they couldn't still be at Kyoa Academy. He glanced out the window. He didn't let the shock show on his face. He looked back at everyone and waited for the explanation he knew was coming. Aeno giggled. Ara, Issei-kun. We have arrived at the game board now. It was then that Graphia's voice came through seemingly everywhere. Welcome to the raiding game between Rias Gremory-sama and Riser Phoenix-sama. The terms of the raiding game are simple. Whichever king falls first loses. My name is Lucifuge. I am the sole judge of this game. I am a neutral party appointed by Surtsk's Lucifer-sama, and my decisions are final. All combat is permitted. All parties have now been transported to the game zone. No participants may leave their side of the board until I announce game start. There will be a period of 1 hour from now until the beginning of the game. Good luck to everyone. So them's the rules then, Naruto said. Anything goes. He felt his fighting spirit rising. Not quite, Naruto-kun, Rias finally spoke up. We cannot leave the board, and we aren't permitted to purposefully kill our opponents. This is an exhibition game after all. We're only playing for my future. Not status. There was a bitterness in her voice. Aeno giggled once more. A few bolts of electricity sparked around her body. Shall we get to it then? Let's. Ria stood. I know none of you are familiar with the rating game, so please let me explain. There are many types of rating games. Some prioritize strategy over strength. Some are little more than advertised brawls. This game seems to be more of the latter, but not completely. I know Oni-sama well. She chose this game and this board because, in her own way, she wants us to prevail. This board is the Kua Academy grounds. Rias waved her hand and a small chessboard appeared in the air between them all. Slowly, buildings and landmarks started appearing across the board. We are here in the Occult Research Clubhouse. Riser and his peerage are on the other side here. She pointed to the student council building on the board. Those are the two sides of the board, which means. That's where promotion happens, Naruto interrupted. She looked at him sharply. Sorry, Rias-chan. He scratched the back of his head abashedly. This feels just like the old war room meetings in the war. Strange the things you miss. As I was saying, Rias said. She looked at Issei. If we want you to promote, then you need to get to the student council building. She smirked. Which is what Riser thinks we're going to do, so we're not going to. Issei-kun. Hi. He stood up sharply and gave a stiff salute. I'm ready for action, Bucko. Ria smiled kindly. I know you are. The boy blushed. Rias got serious again. With the first two seals on your powers removed, you are more powerful than any of Riser's pieces other than his queen. You are the one that Riser will underestimate the most. Issei grew a huge smile. Naruto had a proud one too. Issei had grown more than he could have ever expected in a mere 10 days. He was well on his way to becoming the harem king he dreamed of. Issei didn't know just how powerful he was yet, and tonight was his chance to see his growth for himself. Rias continued. And that doesn't count your transferability. I will be honest with you all. Even excluding Naruto-kun, I believe we could win this. Then why don't we? Everyone looked at Issei in shock. Issei, however, looked more determined than anyone. Issei, Naruto said carefully. I know you wanna show off, but I can literally end this whole thing in a couple minutes. I know. Issei thought for a second on what to say. Bucko. Yes. Naruto isn't normally allowed to be a part of these things, right? Rias looked at him quizzically. That's right. Naruto-kun, as a unique piece, is not an officially recognized evil piece. Because of that, he's not permitted to take part in officially sponsored rating games. This is an exception though. Issei was being unusually careful with his words, which surprised Naruto. He feels inadequate next to you, Kurama said into his thoughts. Issei. Naruto began. Naruto. Issei looked at him directly. There was a fire and fierceness Naruto recognized. He'd seen it in his own eyes when he was younger. It was a need to prove himself. This is our first rating game. We're gonna be in a lot of these going forward, and you won't get to fight with us. We should try to win this without you first. Much as he wanted to, Naruto couldn't dispute a word he said. Naruto had even thought about the same thing. He knew that he was overkill in this situation. It could be great experience for the Occult Research Club to fight another peerage without him in a controlled setting. Rias then spoke up. Issei-kun may be right. With you as insurance, we are essentially guaranteed victory. This is, how they say, playing with house money. This is an opportunity for us that few devils get. Usually, the first rating game for a devil is a loss because they're up against someone with far more experience. This is invaluable experience for us. Naruto could see the wheels turning in Ria's head. Issei had likely just convinced her to keep Naruto on a leash tonight. He looked around the room. Everyone, oddly enough, seemed to side with Issei. He couldn't blame them. They all wanted to represent Rias and show off their growth too. Who was he to deny them? So he didn't. All right. He held out his hands. I see when I've lost the room. I'll just be insurance tonight. Issei added, will you promise not to get involved unless everyone can't keep going? He really didn't want to, but he could see almost everyone wanted him to agree to that. He relented. I promise. Rias-chan. He'd pulled her out of her thoughts. We should get to strategizing then. He gestured at the floating, semi-solid game board. What should we do? Rias gave him a half-grin. I shall rely on your experience, Naruto-kun. He smiled. I'm here to help. Now. How do you want to tear this asshole a new one? Issei stared into the fog. He could feel the hair stand up on the back of his neck. He thought he saw a few ghosts in there. Damn, Akeno-senpai, he thought. That fog's giving even me the heebie-jeebies. The strategy was relatively simple. Rias had taken over the club room with an excited fury that made his heart aflutter. She hadn't even really needed Naruto's advice, though she asked him for his thoughts almost every time she turned around. Issei's chest clenched. He hated the jealousy he felt. Rias hadn't spent any personal time with Issei over their training trip. Yet she spent almost every second with Naruto after he came back from training on his own. Logically, he knew Rias spent her time where it would do the most good. She and Naruto were strategizing and getting ready for the raiding game. Still, he really wished she'd found some time alone with him too. He'd gotten over his brief spark of anger at his king. Ever since then, Rias had been the king he'd known before Asia. Kind. Caring. Even loving. Naruto had told him she'd had her reasons and that was enough for Naruto to move on. Asia had not even believed Rias had done anything she needed to forgive. Issei disagreed, but Asia had insisted, so he'd relented and forgiven. His fury had died. And he was so happy it had. He saw the Rias that saved him and Naruto both again. He'd spent every waking moment of the past 10 days pushing himself beyond the point of exhaustion for her. No. That wouldn't be entirely right. He looked back at the clubhouse. Where Rias, Asia, and Naruto had stayed behind. Again, there was that unpleasant twist in his gut. Issei hadn't only been training while he was conscious. Even while sleeping, he trained with Ddraig. Ddraig had warned him that it wasn't healthy to do too much without risking his mental sanity. But Issei pushed through anyway. He needed every ounce of strength he could amass as fast as possible. He had trained against Naruto's clone the last few days. Kiba and Konako had too. Yet not a one of them could even touch the clone. Issei had boosted continuously for over 5 minutes, yet he still couldn't even grab the clone's clothes. It was a sobering reminder of just how powerful Naruto really was. And how weak Issei was. Issei summoned his sacred gear gauntlet. He looked at the synchronized watch on his other wrist. Everyone had one. Less than 1 minute until game start. Konako was at his side. She had her arms at her side, but Issei saw she was tense too. She was eager to get started. Just like everyone else. Even Kiba had been itching to fight. Issei closed his gauntlet fist. It let out a single boost with a bright green glow from the jewel. His watch went off, beeping loud. Graphia's voice then rang in his ears. Game start. He and Konako sprinted off together through the fog. Phase 1, Rias had told them, is to immediately gain control of the middle of the board. Tonight, that is the gym building. Issei, Konako. The two of you will take it and defeat anyone Riser sends. It should be simple. Riser won't send much. Aeno and Kiba will run defense. Riser will undoubtedly try to sneak some pawns through for an easy promotion. Easy enough for these two. Issei ran right alongside Konako. Before the training trip, Konako had been faster than him. Now, he ran with her without getting winded at all. He smiled proudly. A sign of his growth. It didn't take them long to get to the gym. In fact, he'd be shocked if anyone had arrived before them. They burst through the doors together. No one else was there. They'd arrived first. Issei heard a revving sound from above. Crap. He'd forgotten most people could actually use teleportation magic. No matter how fast he ran, teleportation would be faster. He pulled around his gauntlet and blocked the pair of chainsaws coming down at his head. There was a grating screech of metal as the saws tried to cut through his sacred gear, but he knew the boosted gear would hold even through a direct punch from Naruto. A couple chainsaws were child's play. Konako jumped up and kicked at the two girls wielding the chainsaws. They disengaged before her blow connected and jumped away. The two small girls landed with a pair of their allies on the other side of the gym. Issei counted 4 total enemies now. Where the other two came from, he didn't know. Ria's voice buzzed in his ear through the earpiece he was wearing. Swillen, Myra, and Isle and Nell. Swillen is one of Riser's rooks. The rest are single-piece pawns. This should be fairly easy for the two of you now. Riser is underestimating us. He could hear her smile. Show him how foolish he is, my cute servants. Hi, Bakuo, both he and Konako acknowledged their orders. Issei quickly took stock of his opponents like Naruto had taught him. He hadn't paid much attention when Rias had been going over the abilities of Riser's servants. After all, he had a trump card against literally every single one of them. However, he could guess which ones went with which name. Isle and Nell had to be the twins with the chainsaws. They looked around Konako's age or even younger, as their breasts had barely developed yet. Issei loved breasts of all sizes though, so neither were less of a woman in his eyes. They had light greenish, short hair that went down to their jaws. They both wore a standard gym uniform sweater and a pair of dark leggings. Zulan had to be the tallest one. She had dark hair with a pair of Chinese-styled buns on top of her head. Her dress, much to Issei's pleasure, gave him a generous view of her large, unbound bosom. The dress was a modified Chinese kipao that was deep blue with gold trimming and a white sash. She also had a set of arm bracers over her forearms. And, to Issei's expert eyes, she wasn't wearing a stick of undergarments. If this rating game weren't so serious, he would have stopped to appreciate the sight. Idly, he thought on how Matsuda and Motohoma would react to what he was seeing. They probably wouldn't believe him. They barely believed he was welcomed into the occult research club. That left the last girl, who had to be Myra. She was shorter than Zulan but taller than the twins. She wielded a bow staff that was about as tall as she was. Her hair was a vivid blue styled in 4 ponytails, 2 pointed down and 2 pointing up in a way that looked like a pair of antennae. Her outfit consisted of a red obi over a white haori that extended down to mid-thigh. Her clothing was loose, but Issei spied a pair of firm, average-sized breasts she was hiding from the world. Issei let out a single chuckle. Oh ho! So Riser thinks he can beat me by throwing cute girls at me, does he? His 4 foes looked revolted. Issei-senpai, Konako said, her voice dangerously neutral. Be serious. He hoped he sounded as confident as he was trying to look. He still had butterflies in his stomach. Oh, but I am, my darling Kaoruhei. He flexed his gauntlet-covered fist as it cried out a boost. Konako-chan, do you trust me? No. Issei hung his head. He whined, but Konako-chan. I have a super secret weapon I developed just for this. Please work with me so I can try it out. He gave her his best begging face, trying to imitate her adorable pout as best he could. Konako's eye twitched. She wasn't used to someone else putting on a cute pouting face to her. She was the one who guilt people. Issei doing it must have felt a little weird to her. Naruto finally chimed in through the communicator. Konako-chan. Please let him try it out at least. Worst case, it doesn't work and you pound them into the ground anyway. Best case, he ends the fight quick. The two of you can handle these four easily enough. What's the harm in trying? Konako eyed Issei suspiciously. Issei-senpai pervert. But fine. Issei pumped his arm in the air. Yosh. Thank you, Naruto. Now, let's get these girls. He flexed his fingers lecherously. All I need to do is touch them once. Konako nodded. She gave him a flat stare and flexed her fist in front of him. Don't touch me. He snorted. I wouldn't dare. Internally, he sobbed. Myra leaped across the gym, her staff engulfed in flames now. You seem confident for a bunch of no-talent losers, she cried. Swillen joined her. Fire burned around her fists and feet. I'll handle the rook. You three make quick work of Hyudu. Hi, the twins shouted together. Their chainsaws then sprouted flames around their blades. Isle and Nell sprinted behind Myra. To Issei though, it was like they were moving in slow motion. He smirked internally. This'll be a piece of cake. None of you are anywhere near Yuato's speed, and I can even keep up with him now. He heard another boost from his left hand and caught Myra's staff with it, much to her shock. He grinned at her. That all you got? He taunted her. She grit her teeth and tried to spin into a kick at his head. He ducked under and pat her on her rear. Myra let out a shocked yelp. Issei felt his magic activate. He smirked. One down. He moved after the twins next. He fired a single dragon shot at them, using the power he'd built up so far. They brought up their chainsaws to cut through it. The shot was more powerful than they expected though. They couldn't cut it. Instead, they were both being pushed back by his large red ball of energy. Issei leapt over his shot and landed directly behind Isle and Nell. The two of them let out a shocked gasp. Issei didn't turn around. He smacked them both on their butts, savoring the feeling as he did. They both let out an indignant squawk at his groping, and Issei felt his magic latch on again. Issei then left them to try and overpower his dragon shot. He ducked under a swipe at his head from Myra. He grinned at her, making her furious. You know, he said, I'd really rather not hurt a cute girl if I can. That only made her even more mad. You think I'd let you go like that? She shrieked. Only Riser-sama can touch me, you perverted, low-class, hack grammary boy. She jabbed her staff at him much faster than before. Issei dodged with relative ease. Faster than earlier, she was, but still nowhere near Yuato. It was starting to get kind of fun to him, so he started laughing a little, which infuriated Myra even more. He soon saw her overreach one of her staff thrusts at his gut. He sidestepped it, grabbed her wrist, spun around, and threw her at where the twins were still fighting against his dragon shot. Myra flew into both of the twins, breaking their concentration and letting his dragon shot overtake them. The three of them were sent flying in the resulting explosion. They landed in a smoking heap a few meters away. Issei checked his magic connection and confirmed it was still intact. Myra and the twins struggled to get up. Myra was leaning heavily on her staff for balance. She was gritting her teeth so strong her neck was bulging. Isle and Nell were holding each other up, their chainsaws held limp and no longer burning. Issei admired his work for just a few seconds. It felt great to kick their asses, and grab them too, so easily. He then moved after Swillen and Konako. Konako's shirt was smoking in a couple places, but she had Swillen on the ropes. Swillen was probably the superior martial artist, but Konako was overwhelmingly stronger. It wouldn't be long before Konako landed the one shot she needed to knock her opponent out. There were some large holes in the gym floor from where Konako's first had landed spaced randomly. Issei sprinted over. Swillen saw him and cursed. She tried to land a desperate punch on Konako but she caught it. Not going anywhere, Konako said, her grip tight. She then got inside Swillen's guard, grabbed her waist, lifted her off her feet, and threw her at Issei. Here. Thanks. Issei yelled back. Swillen twisted in the air and tried to land a burning kick on him. Issei ducked under it, confirmed she wasn't wearing any underwear after all, and grabbed her other leg. She yelped and he threw her on top of the other three. Before he did, he felt his magic stick to her. Swillen and the other three slowly stood up. All four were much worse for wear. Their hair was frazzled, clothes hanging loosely or torn, and smoke was rising off of them. All of them staggered and glared at Issei and Konako. Issei didn't stop his nosebleed. This was his big moment. Thank you, Asia. You helped me perfect this. I wouldn't have this opportunity without you. He then declared dramatically, now for my super secret, sure kill attack. Dress break. He spun down to one knee and snapped his finger. The magic worked. It was like an invisible set of shears attacked them. Every single piece of clothing on Swillen, Myra, Isle, and Nell was shredded into nothing, leaving them nude as the day they were born. Issei leered with all his heart. Swillen was the most shapely of them, with full hips to go with her large breasts. Myra, while younger, was quite attractive in her own right. And the twins were very petite, he noted. Small, but beautiful in their own way. Briefly, he felt his envy spike towards Riser again for collecting so many beautiful women for his peerage. The four pieces shrieked in shock, their faces red. The twins hugged each other close to hide as much as they could from prying eyes. Myra squatted down, closing her legs and covering her breasts with her hands. Swillen stayed standing, but she used both hands to try and hide her breasts and womanhood. Blood sprayed from Issei's nose like a high-pressure faucet. He held his fist up in victory. Yes. It works. No woman is safe from the all-powerful dress break. I am the master now. He laughed like a cheesy villain whose plan had worked to perfection. There was utter silence from his communicator. Konako had the blankest look on her face that Issei had ever seen. But he didn't care. Aeno and Asia had told him magic will help him achieve what he desired, and he now had proof it did. The possibilities were endless. Now he could get back at all the people who called him scum and beat him for peeping. Scum, Konako finally said, breaking him from his reverie. Pervert, the twins cried accusingly. Freak. Myra accused. Filthy demon, Swillen finished. Indeed he was all of those things. But he wouldn't be ashamed anymore. He posed heroically with his hands on his hips and chest puffed out. And I. Rias interrupted him. Konako. Please, end it. Riser's an ass, but his servants don't deserve this. Issei, we will be having a long talk about this dress break of yours. There was an unusual ice behind her words. Hi, Buckhook. Konako walked over, lazily stepped around Swillen's pitiful kick, and punched her in the gut. Swillen doubled over. Konako then locked her fists together and hammered them into the other rook's back. Swillen fell and didn't move, her eyes blank. The other three didn't put up any resistance. All fell motionless with a single punch. Done. All four bodies were then enveloped in a bright green light. The four were then whisked away and disappeared. Graphia's voice echoed. Riser Fenix Sama. 1 rook and 3 pawns. Retired. No longer able to continue. Issei wiped his nose. Good work, Konako-chan. He held out his hand for a high five. She gave him as harsh a glare he remembered ever receiving from anyone. Issei-senpai. I'll crush you. Don't touch me. She made no move to get any closer to him. He held his hands out in a placating gesture. He laughed nervously. Ria's voice came to their ears. In the background, he could hear Naruto as well. Issei, Ria's voice was solemn. You did. Naruto was shouting excitedly. Asia-chan, you really are too pure. But, hell, it worked. Hi. Asia sounded so proud. Issei-san wanted to do the kind of magic he always wanted. We finished it last night. Rias. Rias. Naruto was yelling. What? Naruto was trying to talk between his laughing fits. Don't punish the boy. In his own way, he's just trying to help. Issei had a swell of pride. I knew Naruto would appreciate it. Partner. Ddraig spoke into his mind again. Yeah. I'm sorry for laughing. Your dress break is one of the truly first unique uses of magic I've ever seen. Your ingenuity is intriguing. It's a very entertaining ability. He smiled at his sacred gear. Told you, he said smugly. Ddraig laughed. Indeed you did. You can just admit it. You're a pervert too. Ddraig ignored his last statement. Now you need to see if it will work on men too. Issei blanched. He shouted, don't you even joke like that. That's disgusting. Why would I want that? He then realized he'd said that out loud. He grinned sheepishly at Konako's harsh stare. Sorry. Talking with Ddraig. Issei. Ria's voice was still stern. Konako. Hi, Bucko, they both said. Konako still eyed him suspiciously. Well done winning the gym. Even if the methods were unconventional. Naruto's voice could be heard in the background. That's putting it mildly. Rias ignored him. Aeno will arrive in a few minutes to secure the gym from above. She and Kiba just encountered a few of Riser's pawns trying to sneak through for promotion. They'll be through momentarily. For now, maintain your position but... Partner. Ddraig shouted through the boosted gear. Issei felt his instincts screaming at him. He didn't think. He leaped over and pushed Konako down under him. Wah! The roof exploded. Issei didn't know what to do. Ddraig. Do something. On it. The boosted gear exclaimed explosion and glowed bright, but the power didn't go into Issei like it usually did. Instead, it seemed to literally explode outward, forming around him and Konako like a bubble between them and the falling rubble. A red dome of energy about 10 feet in diameter surrounded them. Pieces of wood, glass, and metal bounced off the bubble like a rubber ball. About a minute or two later, the debris stopped falling. The bubble popped. The jewel went dull. Issei slowly stood up off of Konako. He looked around. The gym was destroyed. Where once there had been a large building, there was now rubble. He could see the sky and school grounds rather than ceiling and walls. Above them, Issei saw a single purple figure floating above them. Issei. Issei. Konako. Rias was frantic. Report. Are you okay? Are you there? Aeno, get there now. Issei activated his communicator. We're okay, Bucko. He looked at his sacred gear. And I think I just found a new skill. Ria sighed, relieved. Thank the original 4. How you survived isn't important now. You both need to get out of there. Riser is pissed. He sent Yubelina out much sooner than expected. Leave her to Aeno. Konako stood up and wiped off some errant dust from her uniform. She still stood as far from Issei as possible. She glared at the figure above them. Her face was mostly stoic, but Issei saw a twitch of genuine anger. Hi, Baku. She sounded almost reluctant to move. A crack of thunder broke the brief silence in the air. Yubelina flew up and out of the way of a sudden bolt of lightning. Aeno flew into sight. Her devil wings beating hard enough to send a gust of wind that blew Issei and Konako's hair across their faces. She was dressed in her Thunder Priestess uniform that looked remarkably similar to a traditional High Miko. From where Issei stood, it was hard to be sure, but Aeno looked furious. Issei knew how dangerous a giggling Aeno could be. He didn't want to experience an enraged mistress of sadism. He shivered. Let's go, Konako-chan. Aeno-senpai can handle herself. Konako didn't look at him. She watched the two queens floating imposingly across from each other. She suddenly leaped onto a large metal beam and ran down its length. Issei didn't have that kind of balance, so he had to be more careful as he clambered out. It didn't take him long to get out of the rubble and debris, but Konako was waiting for him as he made the last jump out. A giant thunderclap drew his attention. Aeno was surrounded in crackling electricity like a suit of armor. Yubelina had a large purple aura coming off her body. The amount of power in the air gave him goosebumps. He shivered. He forced himself to turn away. He told himself that Aeno could handle herself. Rias gave them their orders. The two of you are to meet Kiba at the athletic fields. I imagine the rest of Riser's force is there. The three of you will engage them and do everything you can to beat them. Aeno will join you as soon as she's through with Yubelina. Graphia's voice took over all sound in the air, even drowning out the constant thunderclaps. Riser Phoenix-sama. 3 pawns. Retired. Unable to continue. And that's Kiba now, Rias said. Now, go. Hi, Baku. Issei started to move but noticed Konako hadn't yet. He turned to her. Konako-chan. You okay? She still didn't look directly at him. She stared to her left. At last she said, thank you. For saving me. He gave her a toothy smile. As long as I can stand, I'll do everything I can to protect everyone. He told her the promise he'd made to himself while training with Naruto. Now let's get going. Pretty boys waiting on us. Hi. They both ran from the battling queens and towards their next fight. As they ran, they could hear tremendous explosions and thunderclaps. The previous fight hadn't taken long, so they were still a ways from getting winded. About a minute later, the jewel in the boosted gear glowed again and shouted a boost. That reminds me. What happened back there, Ddraig? That bubble was new. Remember what the nun and everyone else has told you. Sacred gears react to the desires of their users. You want to protect people, so it gave you a way to do that. Issei thought back to his lessons. How strong is it? It will get stronger along with you. One of my past wielders was able to withstand Albion's attacks with that protective shield. Ddraig laughed merrily. I wish I could have seen his face when he realized he couldn't touch me. Huh. Issei glanced at his gauntlet. This thing never fails to surprise me. One thing you should know, partner. Your power is theoretically infinite. If your body could withstand it, you could kill even gods. There's a reason I'm one of the Longinastir sacred gears. Ddraig seemed to preen as he spoke. Infinite, huh? Yes. The only limit is you. A beat passed. And the body of whoever you transfer with, I guess. I should warn you about that. I've seen some allies of ours explode because they couldn't withstand the power we gave them. So, be careful, I guess. A bead of sweat fell down the back of his head. Well, that's good to know. He looked at Konako, who studiously refused to even glance his way. Any way to find out how much they could take? Ddraig mentally shrugged. I'm sure it's possible. But I don't really decide how the boosted gear acts. Didn't you activate the bubble back there? Nope. That was all you. Issei was about to ask further, but his thoughts turned to the athletic fields as they approached. He saw the tennis courts first and then the baseball field. In the back was the soccer field. He looked around and spied Kiba Yuoto to the side waiting on them. He and Konako ran over to him. I heard you did well, Kiba said as a greeting. We've dealt a lot of damage so far and haven't lost anyone yet. You bet we kicked their asses. Issei declared, throwing his fist in the air. Issei senpai scum, Konako intoned. Kiba laughed nervously. I heard through Buko how you did it. It's very much a Hyuta-kun thing, but it worked. Their communicators buzzed to life. Good, Rias said. The three of you are together. My familiar reported every remaining piece of risers is just ahead. Riser himself hasn't left the student council building yet. They'll have you outnumbered, but I have faith you can do it. If they start to overwhelm you, retreat back to the clubhouse. Asia-chan can heal you as we prepare for our next offensive. Understood. Hi, Buko. Kiba asked, Buko, how's Akeno-san handling Yubelina? There was a brief pause. It's only a matter of time now. Akeno is pressing her advantage, but Yubelina is no pushover. But we knew she was the most dangerous one. Akeno will beat her soon unless Riser joins the fight. Have faith in her. Understood. Kiba summoned one of his demonic swords. He addressed them. Then let's do our jobs. Boost. Issei bounced on the balls of his feet. I'm ready, Yuoto. Let's go. He sprinted off after the group of enemies on the other side of the athletic fields. Kiba called after him, but he was already gone. He could finally feel it. The thrill of battle. Naruto had told him about it. A risen pulse, the euphoria of the fight. He also couldn't wait to use his dress break again. He knew it worked. And he knew every member of Riser's peerage was an attractive woman. His imagination ran wild at the possibilities, but he pulled it back enough so he could focus on the coming fight. It wasn't easy. However, using some of the meditation tricks Naruto had taught him, it worked. Kiba caught up to him fast. He was unusually serious, Issei noted. It was rare when the pretty boy didn't have some kind of smile. It looked like Kiba also wanted to win without Naruto as much as Issei did. Naruto had humbled the night when they'd trained together. That must have hurt his pride more than anything. Issei felt a brief sense of vindictive joy, but he didn't revel in it long. He would need to work with Kiba as well as Konako if they wanted to win. Kiba and Issei stopped a short while later. Konako caught up a moment later. The three of them stared across at their enemies. There were 7 young women of varying ages, outfits, and modesty. A part of Issei wanted dearly to appreciate the group of attractive girls assembled before him. He tied himself over by reminding himself that his eventual harem would put Risers to shame. One of the younger girls walked forward. Her most distinguishing characteristic was her pair of blonde, drill-like twin tails on either side of her head. She was likely the youngest one, Issei judged based on her breast size. She wore a pale purple dress with dark purple accents. At the small of her back were a few large feathers that made it look like the tail of a bird. The girl spoke to them. How dare you mere grammary servants harm Nii-sama's ladies? You'll regret it? Issei got the feeling this girl had been born into money. She talked like an aristocrat who was full of themselves. Ravel. Ria sounded puzzled. He brought his little sister into this. She sighed. Of course he did. She paused. The plan doesn't change. If she gets in the way, defeat her. Sister. Issei looked at Ravel closely. Now that he focused, he could see some family resemblance. Damn. Riser's just as much a perv as I am, isn't he? I can almost respect him. Ravel then sprouted wings of fire and flew into the air. Everyone, take care of them. A pair of women stepped forward, and Issei's heart stopped for a second. They were cat girls. Real-life cat girls. They even had feline ears on top of their heads. They were both also wearing the kind of sailor uniform that would have been too risque even for a porno. Their tops only covered half of their breasts and their skirts were so short it barely even qualified as a mini skirt. Their entire midriffs and almost their entire legs were bare. Issei wondered where he could find such wonderful uniforms. We'll take the chibi, the red-haired one said. Leave her to Ni and Lee. Chibi. Konako's face showed no expression, but Issei noticed the twitch. She cracked her knuckles. Okay. The pair of twins, Ni and Lee, crouched as if to pounce. Their hands, Issei noticed they fought with cat-like gloves with claws, were coated in fire. The blue-haired one leapt forward first. Konako dodged her and set her flying with a single fist. The other twin darted after her sister with a concerned yell, and Konako chased after them. Hayato's mine. Issei looked at his challenger. She was the tallest of the enemies he'd seen. The first thing Issei noticed was the blank white mask over half her face. She had short orange hair with a few red streaks near her forehead. She was wearing a wide-shoulder leather jacket with a few leather straps tightened on her arms. One of her jeans legs was cut off near her hip with a black legging up to her knee. Issei had to focus hard to not get distracted. Her jacket barely contained her large breasts. Isabella, she said simply. I heard what you did to Swillen. She cracked her knuckles. I dare you to try with me. He would take her up on the challenge. He tuned out his gauntlets boosting. He could tell Isabella wouldn't underestimate him. He'd need to focus, but that left Kiba facing the last three on his own. Kiba was good, but Issei doubted he could take them all without help. Issei flexed his fingers. He looked at his boosted gear. Then he moved. Isabella slammed her fist down. It split the ground. Pieces of dirt flew past Issei's face. Strong. He thought. Must be the other rook. She didn't stop though. She sped after him, swinging her flame-encrusted fists at him and barely missing. The flames warmed Issei's face whenever they got close, and he could tell there was quite a bit of force behind them. She never let him get a footing. Everywhere he went, she was in his shadow. Isabella was obviously more skilled than him. She was nowhere near as fast as Kiba, so he could follow her easily. But she was relentless. She refused to give him even a second's reprieve. It took all of Issei's concentration to just dodge her flurry of punches. Just one opening, he thought. Just one opening is all I need. But her guard was perfect. She never overreached, and she always kept one hand in close to guard should he try to counter. Issei wanted to check in on his friends, but Isabella required his full attention. Even glancing away could be a nearly fatal consequence. He knew how strong one of Konako's fists were, and she was half the size of Isabella. He didn't want to find out if Isabella was indeed stronger or not. Issei was so focused on dodging he forgot to stay aware of where he was. His back hit something solid. Idly, he recognized it as the storage facility close to the student council building. Then he saw the fist. Issei leaped into the air, summoned his wings, and hovered for a second. The wall he'd just been against turned into dust. He looked to his right. About 200 feet away was the student council building. Promotion was right there. Then he saw Kiba. Kiba was facing down two sword fighters. Issei guessed they must have been Riser's two knights. Kiba was holding his own but he was on the defensive. He was wielding two blue and black swords against his foes, but they both used much larger swords than his. One of them was skillfully wielding a western long sword, and the other was fighting with a humongous buster sword. His hesitation cost him. Isabella quickly joined him in the air. She placed herself directly between him and the student council building. He cursed to himself. He then noticed his gauntlet had a rune on it. He looked and saw it was slightly different than the one that said he'd gathered enough power for himself. He immediately realized what it was. He flew at top speed toward Kiba. Isabella gave chase, but, even without promotion, he was faster. She wouldn't catch him. The Catgirl twins flew past him in a heap, colliding with Isabella in the air. Issei looked down and saw Konako brushing her hands off. He smiled. Konako had handled her opponents already. Yo! Yuoto! Kiba looked at him briefly, and the pure fury on his face took Issei aback. He'd never seen Kiba look so enraged before. The knight then blocked both strikes by his opponents. Issei stopped in the air and steadied himself so he didn't miss. Kiba saw him. He gave Issei a knowing nod. He pushed both of his enemies back with a shout and a rare show of strength. He then jumped into the air and called out, Hyuta-kun! Boosted gear gift! Issei shouted. He activated his transfer ability. A jet of pure green energy shot out of the boosted gear towards Kiba. It found its mark. Issei wasn't sure how much energy he sent, but the energy was bright enough for him to guess it had been a lot. Kiba absorbed everything. Kiba fell to the ground and stood tall. Once it was over, Kiba seemed to almost glow. He acknowledged Issei with a grateful nod. He then turned to his dueling partners. Now, Carlamine-san, Ceres-san. Let me show you why I am better than a mere holy sword wielder. He pointed his sword down and plunged it into the ground. With that, he shouted, Sword birth. Thousands of steel swords suddenly came into existence. It was like the very ground and trees were now made up of pure sharpened steel. A literal wave of blades 30 feet high engulfed both enemy knights. Riser Phoenix-sama. 2 knights. Retired. Unable to continue. Graphia told everyone of their end in the game. Yosh. Issei landed next to Kiba. That was pretty cool, pretty boy. The thousands of swords didn't disappear. Kiba turned and gave Issei a strained smile, like he was trying to smile through pain. He was sweating. His match had obviously taken a lot out of him. Thank you, Issei-kun. Thank you. Not over yet, Konako reminded them as she walked over. Still 3 others. Then let's take care of him. Issei shouted. He could almost taste victory now. Isabella and the 2 Catgirl twins flew over a few seconds later. Ni and Lee were enraged. Isabella's face was as expressionless as her mask. Konako stepped forward. She cracked her knuckles. Want more? She asked. Ni and Lee didn't wait. They dived right after her. Issei started to move to help but quickly saw there was no need. They couldn't touch Konako no matter how hard they tried. It was like she knew what they'd try before they even did. After dodging for a few moments, Konako sunk into a stance Issei didn't recognize. She pounced. The twins didn't last very long. Konako moved with a swiftness Issei hadn't seen from her. She was agile as a cat, jumping around and swiping at her enemies. One of them tried to block her strike. Instead, the force behind the blow sent her flying into the other one. Konako went in for the kill immediately. Before they could react, she brought down an axe kick atop their heads. Ni and Lee didn't stand back up. The green light teleported them away and Graphia announced the last 2 of Riser's pawns had retired. Isabella hesitated. Issei couldn't really blame her. In short order, they'd flipped the script. Now the Gremory side had the overwhelming numbers advantage. Kiba didn't wait though. He quickly closed the divide and landed 4 cuts. He stabbed down into her shoulder with a thin blade he summoned, staggering her, and Issei then moved to take advantage of it. He charged and fired a dragon shot at her. He then trailed in its shadow, concealing himself from her line of sight. Isabella punched away the dragon shot, but it left her open to an immediate counter. Issei didn't miss. He brought his gauntlet down on her head, sending her spiraling out of the sky to the ground below. Konako was there waiting for her. She kicked Isabella to the side, and she flew through the concrete walls of the student council building. Grafia then reported Riser's last rook had retired too. Pure elation filled Issei. They'd nearly done it. Just a few pieces were left. And they hadn't lost anyone. All that was left was for Aeno to win, and then Rias Grammari-sama. Queen. Retired. Unable to continue. Issei, Kiba, and Konako all froze. Aeno-senpai, lost. Issei couldn't believe it. Aeno was the queen. She was the one Issei was certain wouldn't lose. He clenched his fists. They had to have used some kind of trick. Rias's voice crackled to life in their ears. Aeno has lost. She seemed to not believe it as she said it. She cursed. Phoenix tears, of course. Yubelina must have healed herself. Damn it. She'll be heading for you three now. Quickly finish up there and retreat back. We'll heal and regroup. Issei said through gritted teeth, "Hi, Baku." He turned and looked at the last two of Riser's servants left. They had to be his bishops. Ravel was one, and the other one was a few years her senior. The other girl was wearing a purple kimono with a mixture of red, yellow, and white patterns on it. The girl in the kimono looked calm, but Issei could see her hands shaking. And Ravel looked genuinely terrified of them. Issei's brief flame of fury died out. Shame washed over him. In that moment, he saw Asia's scared face as Renare had come after her. How could he do something like that? Kiba and Konako didn't say a word. Kiba sprinted after the two bishops first with his wave of swords following behind him. Konako followed shortly after. Issei moved before he thought. He didn't know where the speed came from, but he was thankful for it all the same. He caught Kiba's sword as it was coming down towards a cowering Ravel. "Yuoto," he screamed. "Can't you see they're scared?" His arm shook as it held back Kiba's blade. "There's no need to fight them." A flash of shame crossed Kiba's face. He looked at the girls behind Issei. He dropped the sword, it and the thousands of others following in his wake evaporating into thin air. "You're right, Hyuta-kun." He looked at Konako, who'd stopped when he had. "We should retreat and regroup now." Issei let out a relieved breath. He looked back at Ravel and the other girl. "You're safe." Ravel had a flash of red on her face. The other girl grabbed her and ran towards their home base. Issei then joined Kiba and Konako. They all summoned their wings and made to fly back to the clubhouse. A giant wall of flame blocked their retreat. You would dare try and harm Ravel. Riser Phoenix had arrived at last.